Participating in sport is a really positive way to make friends, to build community, to meet people, to get out, and to feel like you're a part of something.
Physical activity is important because it connects your mind to what's happening in your body.
I do think it's really important for people to discover their physical selves.
If I had known that physical activity was a great way to feel happy when I was depressed, I probably would have been way more interested.
It really, at least for me, has been like a good outlet in expressing a lot of kind of like my frustrations and emotions in a more healthy way.
It's good to keep young people on track, it's good for your health, and it teaches you a lot of life lessons. Dedication, hard work, compromise, community.
I think people are afraid of the trans community because they don't know any trans people, or they don't think they know any trans people, and they have a fear of what trans looks like.
Many people don't even have definitions. They don't even know what's trans, what's transsexual, what's transgender, what's a drag queen. What do you mean by gender expression?
It's a bit of an umbrella term. It can really be taken up in a lot of different ways, and it is a term of self-identification. So I couldn't label somebody as trans, they would have to identify that way.
It's as complex as general society is. That's how complex the trans world is. If I get 100 of my friends together, there's 100 different interests, 100 ways of expressing themselves.
Trans people are just like you, just like me, just like anybody else in the world.
For youth to be in physical activity is something that we need to be able to encourage for everybody, and to try and make that accessible for everybody, and to target genderqueer and trans youth specifically, I think is important, because they need to be raised up and encouraged and empowered to be able to exist in the bodies that they exist in and to be met where they are, rather than to have conversations about how they need to change.
There's not a lot of athletic facilities and teams that are public and have enforced policy of being LGBT friendly.
You know, there is this compelling force really of legislation, but also policy that says you have to do this work. There isn't an opt-out option.
Being called the wrong pronoun, the wrong gender that you don't go by.
It was very frustrating because I always corrected the coach that I go by she pronouns, not he, but he still called me he.
I've been wanting to get back into sport, but I've been finding it hard to find places where I'd be comfortable.
A lot of folks, from experience that I dealt with, once they started transitioning, they quit gym because change rooms are not accessible to them.
I was afraid, I was literally afraid of being caught and then being embarrassed and dragged out. These were all kinds of things that I was afraid of happening.
I can't go to the gym because I can't use one of the change rooms. I can't use the gym at school that I pay for in my tuition fees because I don't feel comfortable in the change rooms.
Well, for me, a lot of the discomfort was being the only openly queer and trans person there.
If I were to go to a gym, it'd be horrible because I would have to be girly in order to be accepted and not be considered a dangerous person.
Transgender people need to have change room access, that transgender students have a right to access the change room that's appropriate for the gender they are presenting as.
It's more of having the accessibility to be able to dress the way we want to in an environment that we're comfortable and able to express ourselves.
I put up posters that said boxing for women, and I put them up on telephone poles, and within about 2 months 40 women showed up. Thus started the Toronto News Girls Boxing Club. When I first started the club, it was for women only, and then many years ago all of a sudden a bunch of my members started transitioning, and it just kept happening more and more. And I was trying to figure out how can I make sure that they can still participate in boxing. So then we added 2 co-ed time slots. And then I had a few members who didn't identify as male or female. I always thought you're either male or female or trans male or trans female. but I quickly learned that there are many genders, and which was an amazing lesson. And I was trying to figure out how to accommodate everybody. Our trans policy has really cleared up a lot of things around here. First of all, anytime we have new members, I give them an intro so that I explain what a class looks like, what to expect, and I explain to them right off the bat that, and we do a lot of outreach to the transgendered community, so we have a very mixed population around here. And sometimes you can tell the expression on their face that they don't know quite what to do with that, because maybe it's just been introduced, the idea has been introduced to them for the first time. Once we put our trans policy into place, we wanted to make sure that we had a couple of change room options. So we built a second change room that could be, you know, during the week it's kind of like usually the fellas change in room in there and the gals change in there. And we also have a washroom that can be used as a private change room. We only have the one washroom, and it is through the gals room. So during co-ed or trans classes, I'll put up a barrier so that everybody has free access to the bathroom. And that's pretty much it. It was easy.
First, we started as Ilnana in 2007 because we wanted to really create a space for those of us who were amazing dancers and amazing artists but didn't have a place to put our stories on stage.
Even though there's queer men in dance, we don't even see that represented on stage very often.
In 2010, I saw Ilnana perform. I was just like overwhelmed with the fact that to me, the performance was like everything I wanted from dance.
Like in most classes, it's like, okay, now boys do this movement, girls do this movement, and that separation in itself is so stressful. But to know that those separations don't need to happen, we don't have to go like boys have to go over here, girls have to go over here.
Even the language to like talk about movement and want to try and figure out a language to talk about it, because it's still very like, this is a feminine thing and this is a masculine thing, and trying to break out of that when teaching classes and when taking classes and when talking about movement and being like, this is something that's sharper and lower to the ground. This is something that's more fluid and really high.
It's a constant reevaluation of how whoever walks in the door, whoever, with each participant, it needs to have a flexibility and adaptability to be able to change.
Kula Yoga opened in Toronto 4.5 years ago. We were inspired to create a more inclusive and a safer space for more people after listening to a lot of people's experiences of the space. Some of the initiatives that we've had so far, we wanted to make our change rooms more inclusive. So knowing that a lot of people weren't coming to the space because of the change rooms, or were afraid to be in the change rooms because of what other people in the change rooms might think or say. So we changed the signs to the change rooms to make them more inclusive. We have segregated gender change rooms that say cis, trans, gender queer, and that the change room is inclusive to all of those people. And we know that it's not necessarily going to be safer for everyone, and people will still choose not to use the change rooms, but our hope is that we're educating a lot more people about who may be in the change room, and that really we want a space that everyone feels welcome and good. To anyone who's at the beginning of doing this work but feels a little bit resistant or hesitant, I honor that it is really scary work, because there's not always like a lot of examples out there on how this work is getting done. But from what I've experienced in my own life, like anything worth doing usually means that I'm kind of afraid to do it. And so I think that by looking at the barriers in your own space, why it doesn't feel inclusive for everyone, is like one of the most important things we can do.
Black Pirates was started by a group of anarchists that just wanted a space to work on their bikes and not have to pay for it.
It's a do-it-yourself space. We believe in encouraging people to learn to do things themselves, so we teach.
Women in Trans Sundays was started by some trans men that volunteered in the space.
It's a safe space for women and transgender people to come and learn about bicycles, eat, communicate with each other, and it's, for me, it's been a very successful program. We do have men come in and they'll ask to buy a bike or do a repair, and we do our best to explain to them what the program is and ask them if they identify with any of those groups.
So I asked them to step outside right away. Hey, let's talk about this outside more. Leaving it up to them. Do you identify as a woman or a trans person? Do you know what a woman and a trans person is?
And then ask them if they don't, if they wouldn't mind coming back when we're open full hours. One of my first experiences at Bike Pirates as a volunteer was helping 2 trans youth fixing their bikes, and it was an amazing experience for me. I'll see them talking about their bikes and they're quite confident and knowledgeable about it. That just makes me really happy.
I like having policy as a starting place because it always gives you a grounding for then program and communications and how you evaluate. My concern always with policy is that often we stop there, and then I think it actually further disengages or puts up barriers for the community if that's where it stops, because it feels like you've checked a box and then you're not doing the next step.
So I would challenge them to sort of say, this is your mandate, this is what you're putting out there. You need to deliver and live by your mandate. There's no point in saying that this is what you're going to serve. These are people you're going to serve if you're not serving them.
To me, it's beyond putting the posters up there saying, oh, I support trans people or I support gay people, and putting all kinds of rainbows. And it looks beautiful and it's great. And I think it's a great idea to have because it invites people to come to your place because people are going to feel safe and saying, okay, this is a safe space. But it's beyond the rainbows and beyond the posters.
What happens if other people complain? And one of the places we get pushback from schools is schools will say, well, what if other people's parents complain? And there's this great fear of other people's parents. And to say, we accommodate the student with the complaint. And so if the non-trans student complains that there's a trans student changing in their change room, we need to help that student recognize that there is a student changing in the change room, and that if they need to change in a space that is private, we can accommodate the one with the complaint, but we're not going to move the trans student because somebody else has a problem with them.
You start with a very difficult thing because you typically classify sport as men's sport or women's sport. And so right away by that classification, you create an interesting challenge.
So it can start by just questioning and thinking about how their classes and teaching and studio space is gendered in different ways. And what space is given to particular genders and which genders are affirmed in that space and which aren't.
So I do really feel that it's kind of on the personnel to try and just informally try and create a positive environment.
People have ideas in their heads about what trans people are and what genderqueer people are and what intersex people are, but they generally have never had real experience on what that looks like and what that is realized into.
So when you talk about barriers to accessing sport and physical activity, money and education come up a lot. And one of the ways that we can address those barriers, money, it seems simple, but it's not always. You want to have programming that's accessible. So whether that's $2 or $3 to participate, or a sliding scale, or pay what you can, or having a free program, those are kind of the ideal options, is to really reduce that barrier as much as possible.
I think people think that they're okay and they understand, but they really have to get on board with making spaces safe and making sure that their volunteers or their employees really understand how to interact with trans people.
Doing outreach and getting to know what the actual needs of trans and genderqueer youth are. Because if you're not connected to communities or personally self-identify as genderqueer or trans, then you're not necessarily going to have access to that information. And that's okay that you don't have access to that information, but you need to know that you don't have access to it and that there's going to be work involved in gaining that knowledge.
There's not a binary in society of male and female. It's a fluid scale. There's intersex people, there's genderqueer people, there's trans people. And to unjustly pretend that they don't exist is a problem.
It's important to be inclusive of all communities, you know, because it's about time that we look at gender in this society in a different way.
Honestly, we're just the same as you. Like we have different circumstances that kind of make our bodies a little bit different or our sexual identities a little different. But at the end of the day, we're still just people and we deserve to be in these spaces just as much as you do. And like we want to be in these spaces.
I have a lot of confidence that we can you know, overcome a lot of the battles in society. But I think it starts at a smaller scale.
If somebody asked me why should trans people be included, you know, I'd ask them why shouldn't trans people be included?
I love doing the classes for the genderqueer community because they're so happy to be here. They're so appreciative, you know? It's pretty awesome.
I think just from knowing genderqueer and transgender youth, I can't even imagine why I wouldn't want them to be in my space and in my world and in my life.